Steve. I'm here, Steve. To my pastor, there's some folks who don't have their phones muted, and please mute your, if you can, other than Pastor Miriam, mute your video. And also, Steve, if I could see me, that would help a lot, like as the central. I'm seeing Nigel as the central on my screen. And so I just want to especially acknowledge the pastor of the Real Life Community, Pastor Miriam Niles, my pastor and my sister. I also want to acknowledge our wonderful associate pastor, Miss Vanessa Robinson, who is amazing. And lastly, I want to acknowledge my fellow ministers, part of the leadership team, Minister Diara, Minister Regina Kimbrough, and Minister Steve Liverpool. I have great company to be in the midst of, and I'm very grateful. And so,
Reverend Rochelle,
yes.
Not to interrupt you, my computer decided it needed to reboot itself. And so the plan was to give you a wonderful introduction, the introduction that you deserve. So I really apologize for that. But listen, family, we've started this 3-part teaching, Authenticity Works, and I couldn't think of a better partner to tag team with than Reverend Rochelle Durant. This is a powerhouse. She is a wealth, a treasure chest of wisdom and insight. We were in divinity school together, and I tell you, if there's anyone I wanted to be teamed with, it was her. when we had literally had to pull our team together to get the job done. But that's the kind of woman that she is, the kind of energy that she brings. She is a mouthpiece of truth and wisdom, and has the credentials, both within ministry and in her other vocation as a dynamic attorney. And so she is just a powerfully gifted woman. And so we're honored that she's going to be doing part 2 of this teaching, and I'm sure she'll get into that. But I wanted to give her the kind of introduction that she deserves. And she also sits on the leadership team for Real Life and continues to contribute in so many ways. So we are just honored. I'm honored. I'm excited. I'm excited to sit back, go mute on the voice and video, which I invite everyone to do. If you're not muted in your audio or your video, please do so as Reverend Rochelle brings our life study today. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to you. Again, please make sure we've started streaming live on Facebook. Please make sure that your video and your audio are muted during this time. So Reverend Rochelle, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Pastor. Oh my goodness, what an introduction. I'm humbled and grateful. So information on basically how to undo the energy of those false gods. And so if you missed it, put something in the chat and someone will be able to hook you up. So now here we are in June, and we are in this spirit of authenticity. Can't believe we're in June, and sharing this piece on how authenticity works. And Pastor Miriam, last week, she talked about it pays to be you. And in part 3, she'll be speaking about, she'll be following up and going further into her 3 principles: inspiration, intention, and in harmony. So I invite you to join in next week. And again, right now, I'm moving into the concept of the gospel according to you. On the heels of Pastor Miriam's series on the death of a God, it occurred to me that, you know, when someone dies or something dies, when we have a death or a transition of a loved one, oftentimes it gives us an opportunity to pause. We begin to think about the life of that person, and we also begin to think about our own life, what it's been like. And sometimes there can be a reawakening of sorts. An opportunity presents itself to us to consider where we are, to consider how we're living, to maybe identify matters that are no longer really important, and those things that are prominent in our life, even in the midst of dealing with the grief and the loss and the celebration. It is an opportunity to think about what legacy we will leave. And so after considerable contemplation, we may decide to take action and to do some things differently when we've experienced a loss. And so in the aftermath of that teaching about the death of a God, I just thought about the process that we go through. And as human beings, as spiritual beings, it is so natural when there is a death or a loss that we feel the need to replace it with something. And hopefully something fruitful. And so as we have moved through the death of those gods and become more aware and acknowledging the God and the goddess in ourselves, it occurred to me that we can replace those gods with ourself or our own story. And that's where I came up with the concept or the idea of the gospel according to you. So I have 3 points that I want to share with you as it relates to the gospel according to you, developing a gospel according to you, engaging or re-engaging your gospel. And the points are we reflect. Oftentimes we may find ourselves taking time to reflect. And then the next stage or phase in the process, we reimagine. After we've reflected on what was, what is, then we have an opportunity to reimagine. And then my third point is revolution. Woo, and I love that, where we get to re-envision and recreate. So I'm going to move right into it. But before I do, I want to just offer some definitions of the term gospel. And for those who require it, maybe make some connections to the biblical gospels. And so one definition of gospel, according to the Encyclopedia Britannica, the word gospel is derived from the Anglo-Saxon term Godspell, meaning good story. And then there's a rendering in the Latin term evangelium, and then the Greek evangelion, meaning good news or good telling. Also, Britannica tells us that the gospel is any of the 4 biblical narratives covering the life and death of Jesus Christ, and written according to a tradition, respectively, by people referred to as Saint Matthew, Saint Mark, Saint Luke, and Saint John. And any of you who have delved into the Bible are familiar with those evangelists, and they're placed at the beginning. Their stories, their gospels are placed at the beginning of what is known as the New Testament in the Bible. And since about the late 18th century, the first 3 gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, have been called and known as the synoptic gospels. And basically because they have similarities in their stories. Synoptic means similar. They have similarities in their stories, their version of the life and ministry of Jesus Christ. And the synoptic gospels, they contain the stories, the 3 of those, they contain the stories of the miraculous healings and the gathering of the disciples and Jesus's trial and crucifixion, more accurately described as an assassination. And they have these similarities, yet the 4 gospels, the authors, they tell their story, the story of Jesus, from their perspective in their own way. So there are 4 different versions. And in St. Matthew's, scholars have surmised that the gospel according to Matthew may be a rewrite of Mark's gospel. Imagine that. Matthew is not an eyewitness account of Jesus's life and story and ministry. Matthew may have played an important role in formulating the teaching in the gospel, Jesus's ministry, or in leading the community from which the gospel originated. Then there's Mark, Saint Mark. According to the author of the gospel according to Mark, the ministry of Jesus is one of healing the sick, lame and blind, who come to him in overwhelming numbers. This is according to Mark. A ministry with Jesus arguing with religious leaders who oppose his words, fear his popularity, and then ultimately plot to kill him. A ministry that reaches the obstinate and uncooperative disciples who initially leave to follow him, and then in the end, they betray him and turn him over to his enemies. They flee when trouble comes and deny that they ever knew him. This is the gospel according to Mark. It's in Mark's version that Jesus is called the Son of God, and that supposedly came from a voice from heaven. In the St. Luke version, it follows the story about, it is the only one that really tells us about the birth of Christ. So according to Luke, he knows about Jesus's birth, and there's a full narrative in that gospel. This version tells a lot about Jesus's travels and focuses a lot on the marginalized folks in the community and the dispossessed. And lastly, bringing up the rear is St. John. In John's version of the gospel, Jesus is deemed to be the incarnate Word of God. And you've probably heard that passage recited. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and the Word became flesh. That is in John's gospel. In John's version of Jesus's teaching contains very few of the well-known parables from the other gospels, and the speeches are a lot longer in his version. And so while all four gospels participate in the same work of interpreting the story of Jesus for the life of the faith community, however, each tells it differently. So think about that. One man, Jesus, four different versions. The same Jesus, but these evangelists had their own take on how it all went down. So, you know, when you think about that, it's a stark illustration of exactly why it's important that you be the one to take the lead in developing the gospel according to you. You can't leave it up to other folks, I don't care who they are, to tell your story. As African Americans in this country, we all know too well how that can work out. Lies, 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 and more lies, but I digress. Authenticity requires that you produce the gospel according to you. So at any point in your earthly journey as a spiritual being, you can decide to embrace the death of any false god. You can engage, maybe for the first time, or re-engage your story, the good telling of your story according to YOU. And remember, authenticity works. So I have this useful process that I offer for your consideration, a process to implement the authorship of the gospel according to you. In phase one, we have an opportunity to reflect. Remember, we are developing, redeveloping, engaging, adding to the gospel according to you, the gospel according to me. And so I'm going to move through this very quickly. I got lots of good tidbits and I want to get them all in, so buckle up. So first, let me give you a working definition of reflect. To throw back without absorbing, to think deeply or carefully about, to consider. Another definition, this is a critical and initial phase in the process, the reflection portion. In this phase, you're encouraged to reflect on your beginnings, your past, how you were raised, where you grew up, what impact that had on you, and how you've shown up in the world. I think that there are two parts, or I kind of look at it in two parts when I think about development and how we came along in life. And I ask, what part was nurture and what part was nature? So the part that was nature, the you that came to earth as the spiritual being that entered life from the spiritual realm, came to life in the flesh, and will most certainly return to the spirit realm one day. What part was nurture? The you that's been influenced and shaped by those experiences and circumstances that impacted the native you. Both nature and nurture make up the authentic you. Both are elements in the gospel according to you. And so we're reflecting. What gods were influential in your life? There are many more gods than those that loom large in the lives of people who were engaged in church, who were involved in church, who lived a very religious life. Your past, my past, has many gods, and there are those powerful, sometimes overpowering, dominant sources of influence, conscious or unconscious, in your life. There are the gods of mother, father, teacher, siblings, extended family, the God of poverty or lack, the God of privilege, the money God, the gods of the hood or the neighborhood, the God of skin complexion, unfortunately, yep, the media and popular culture gods, the career or GS level gods, the gods of academia, education, and miseducation, and the list can go on and on and on. There are many God forces that enter our lives. What gospel has been featured prominently, predominantly in your life during the different seasons of your life? Let me say that again. What gospel has been featured prominently in your life during the different seasons of your life? The development of the gospel, according to you, requires deep, extensive, ongoing reflection. The gospel, according to you, should be an organic, living, evolving story about you, what you've come to know to be true for you. Just as is done with the gospel stories in the biblical text, you get to keep lending your interpretation and understanding to your gospel, to your story. Just like it is in your life. You know, in life, nothing is static. In fact, static can lead to stagnant, and we're not doing that. So real life, if I may, let me keep it real. And let me use my own story as an example of me reflecting on how I came to be who I am, the parts that were nature, the parts that were nurture. So I was born and raised in Boston, Massachusetts, and I'm sticking to my script, trying to move through this quickly. For the first 4.5 years of my life, I lived in Mission Hill Projects in Roxbury, Massachusetts. I was the youngest of 4, and thereafter, I spent my life in another hood in Boston called Dorchester. When my parents first moved into the projects in the early 50s, and for the millennials, that's the 1950s, the projects consisted of about 60 to 70% African Americans and about 30 to 40% Caucasians and others. The courtyards in the projects had grass and fencing, the basketball hoops had nets, the swings had seats. By the time we moved down in August of '66, and I remember that so vividly, the vast majority of the residents were African American. The neighborhood had begun to deteriorate due to a variety of influences. The street that I lived on, which was called Annunciation Road, soon became known as Assassination Road. So Mission Hill Projects got a reputation much like the biblical Galilee, Jesus's neighborhood. Folks began to think of Mission Hill and think that no good thing could come out of the projects. This was the gospel being spoken over my life and the lives of many others who matriculated through Mission Hill during that season. You could hear that gospel preached and espoused by many. The racist politicians in Boston at the time, the media, the school system, leaders of public institutions, the propaganda being produced and embraced by Caucasians in Boston, creating what became known as white flight and from the inner cities. And I'm just reflecting, and you know, as an inside, you know, that white flight group is now gobbling up real estate in those same neighborhoods as quickly as they can. And I guess the reverse of white flight is what some people like to call gentrification, if that sounds familiar, but I digress. Fortunately for me, there was another gospel being spread and literally preached relentlessly in the Durant household. And it was the gospel according to Leonard Durant, my dad, himself a product of a Galilee neighborhood, so to speak. And as a young person, my dad was like a god in my life. He provided and nurtured a sense of self-worth and power. He laid down the law in our home, for better or for worse. And at a crucial time in my life and in the history of this country, And by the way, my mom anchored the home. She was the goddess energy. Leonard, my dad, he lived out a gospel in the 60s and 70s that yes, Black lives mattered. Not only did they matter, they were proud and powerful. Handouts were not requested or required. Forced public school desegregation and general assimilation were considered the devil. I'm just reflecting. In the gospel, according to Leonard, the education of the Black child began at home and prepared me to confront the miseducation in the public school system. According to Leonard's gospel, you were either part of the problem or part of the solution. There was no room for gray area in the struggle. And nowadays we have so many folks operating in that gray area in the season that we're in. They're too scared to determine their role as a problem solver or problem maker. And they're very sheep-like and armchair soldiers, and they duck and hide and reappear when it's convenient. And that's a whole nother message. So in the gospel, according to Leonard, God wasn't Catholic, wasn't Protestant, wasn't Baptist, Methodist, or Episcopalian. In fact, in that season when his gospel was impacting me the most, the 70s, during that Black Power movement, that God was dead. Instead, the message, the gospel according to Leonard, taught me that God was whoever I was, wherever I was. Taught me self-reliance, self-determination, and nation building. All of that had separate chapters in the gospel according to Leonard Durand. And so I'm still reflecting, and this is what reflection can look like in this first phase. Looking back, thinking about those things that impacted you as you begin to develop, redevelop, engage the gospel according to you. But listen, as riveting as the gospel according to Leonard, my dad, was and still is, there came a time in my life when I had to let parts of his gospel die and begin to re-envision, to recalibrate, and begin my own spiritual journey and begin in earnest to develop and birth the gospel according to me, the gospel according to Rochelle. As with the gospels in the New Testament, my gospel and my dad's gospel had many similarities. I can still vibe with many of the principles, but my version is different than his. My version is according to my story, my lived experience. It is my authentic work. And remember, authenticity works. So reflection is key. Consistent daily reflection is very important in developing the gospel according to you, and some gods must die. It requires, authenticity requires that we regularly make the time to sit and be still, to be with our thoughts and feelings, to be present and alone. Yes, alone with self, and to just be. For some, this can, maybe be uncomfortable, but it is totally necessary. And reflection bears fruit and has its benefits. Again, I offer this for your consideration. Phase 2, the phase where we get to reimagine. So we've reflected on what was, on how things impacted us, those things that we came to life with, and those things in our circumstances that had great influence, and those gods that may still serve us, and those gods that need to die. So in the reimagining phase, let me give you a working definition of reimagine. To imagine anew, to form a new conception of, to recreate or re-envision. And so while engaging or re-engaging the authentic you in the development of the gospel, imagination is powerful. You are in the process of recreating and re-envisioning, right? You must be willing to engage all your faculties, spiritual, mental, physical, emotional, and even supernatural. You need to consult the cosmos, the sun, the moon, the planets, relative to when you were born, what was going on at the time that you came to this earth as a spiritual being, what astrological influences make you, you. Leave no stone unturned when you're reimagining. Be sure to consult nature and animal life. Mother Earth provides so much of what is needed to develop and grow and expand. Use it. This reimagining process feeds the development of the gospel according to you. This process is not a one-time thing, this whole reimagining. Each day we wake up on this side, we have an opportunity and really a responsibility to incorporate whatever it is our minds can imagine and envision. The universe is always receptive to our movement. So why not make your demands on the universe? So reimagining, yes, it requires that you have a daily practice to center, shape, reshape, define, and support the gospel that is you. The notion of a daily practice is so keen in my life, and it is so near and dear to me. I just want to give a few more tidbits on that, if you'll just bear with me, and some concepts for you to consider and maybe even kickstart a good daily practice. So here we go. Don't operate sparingly when it comes to developing your daily practice. Invest the time in prayer, your version of meditation, maybe some writing, and definitely some visioning. Don't limit yourself to predetermined circumstances like money, how much time you have, what your educational level is, and definitely don't limit yourself based on past experiences, missteps, so-called mistakes or miscalculations. They don't define who you are, but rather they help to realign your actions, maybe to renegotiate your agreements and to reposition yourself. I love that term, pivot, help you to pivot. We live in such a performance-based society, particularly in this country, and society would like to connect your value to what you do. In this society, you have to proactively and intentionally create a gospel that centers on your being, your human being, your spiritual being, your authentic gospel. It can't be measured by the likes or the votes that you get in your social media, the number of those happy emojis you receive, nor the square footage of your primary domain, the make and model of your whip, your salary, your GS level, or any extraneous concepts out there used maybe to define you. They do not. The gospel, according to you, should function on the I am frequency. I am wonderful. I am a creator. I am a spiritual being on an earthly journey. I am well. I am healed. I am healthy. I am whole. I am abundance. Reimagining can reset your dial to the I am frequency. Reimagining is not some flight of fancy, nor is it for the faint of heart. It takes courage and consistency to ascend from the current physical position and the day-to-day circumstances and open yourself up to limitless possibilities, to recreate daily your images of your God self. Because of course, every day is different, right? And so next, you must be laser focused, yet flexible. So that's interesting. You were not created to bow down to anyone or anything, but there is indeed wisdom and strength in being flexible, in having the ability to bend some. When doing so will benefit your development. When envisioning and experiencing another option, I love options, will bolster your journey. When bending will prevent you from breaking. So be focused but flexible. Your life will require that you use your divine imagination throughout the seasons of your natural life in order to flow into this third phase. And I'm coming to a close soon. This third phase in the development or the redevelopment or the enhancement of the gospel according to you. And that's revolution. Phase 3 is revolution. And let me give you a definition that caught my attention. Merriam-Webster's definition of revolution includes the following. Listen to this. A fundamental change in the way of thinking about or visualizing something. I like that. A change in paradigm, a sudden, radical, complete change. This one really took me out. The overthrow or renunciation of one government or ruler in the substitution of another by the governed. Revolution, phase 3. I love the last definition. In developing the gospel according to you, you get to renounce any prior belief systems that no longer serve you. You get to overthrow what you used to believe or what you were taught to believe, how you used to operate and show up in the world. You get to govern yourself in a whole different manner. In a whole different manner, and you get to choose what it's going to look like. Revolution, the gospel according to you. Sometimes in a revolution, things may blow up. There may be an eradication of what existed. So it is in your everyday life. To live authentically and according to your gospel, you may have to blow up some stuff. More than likely, you're going to have to blow up some stuff. You may have to eradicate some people or situations from your life that no longer flow with the current season you're experiencing. The gospel according to you and only you may take you on a whole new course. In that scenario, there will likely be some folks in your life that will not continue on in your life. On the new course that you're carving out for yourself. Your new course may create an equation that doesn't fall neatly into any predefined or pre-existing category. It may not add up to some folks. It may not fall into a good category like algebra, geometry, or calculus. The revolution is not a neat or precise operation. It may get messy, but the gospel according to you requires it. And I'm almost finished. Once you've developed the basic framework of the gospel according to you, you've reflected, reimagined, and you're in this revolution process, you're called upon then to spread your gospel, the gospel according to you, everywhere you go. Bring it with you into all of your life, all the corners of your life. Let your gospel be the energy and vibration manifested as the authentic you. Let me say that again. Let your gospel be the energy and the vibration manifested as the authentic you. In that way, you can carry it everywhere you go. You don't have to have a different translation of your gospel depending on the circumstances that you find yourself in. You need to follow your own gospel at all time, at all costs. And let's be real. There should not be a gospel according to you at work, a gospel according to you within your spiritual community or your church, a gospel according to you at the mall, at the club, on social media, on vacation, at the family gathering. There should be the gospel according to you. Authenticity breeds a level of consistency, reliability, and yes, responsibility. It's not schizophrenic or undisciplined. And of course, yes, it's easier said than done. When you show up on the scene, the gospel according to you, the energy should shift to incorporate your gospel. Sometimes it might be a slight shift, depending on the circumstances. Sometimes it might be a huge shift. Your impact should be felt. Authenticity does not blend in or assimilate with the existing essence. There's an added impact one way or another because there's only one gospel according to you. It has your authorship and your imprint. Your daily living requires that you be the one to exegete the text of your gospel. You be the one to interpret and define your story. When you're living from the gospel according to you, you don't allow other interpretations of you to become your story. In life, situations and seasons will definitely change. We got change, so much change going on in this season. People will change and you will change. The gospel according to you should synchronize with the context of your lived experience. Otherwise, then, there's room to question its authenticity. You feel me? Once you've developed the gospel according to you, authenticity requires that you practice what you preach. Don't allow others to create different translations of your gospel that you have not sanctioned and approved. Let your life speak. Living out your gospel, living authentically is not easy. If it were, more folks would be engaging in it. It's definitely not for those interested in winning a popularity contest. And there are many roads that you will travel solely in the company of yourself. And lastly, and of course for your consideration, if you just give me a few more minutes, I'd just like to leave you with just a few indicators or signs that you are living your gospel according to you. Living out that good story, that good telling that's uniquely yours, living authentically. Here are just a few signs I offer. Some of them may resonate with you. When you're living authentically and living in your true personhood, your true nature, the gospel according to you, at times you may feel like an outcast, like so many of the other authentic souls that came before you. You won't always be popular, but more than likely you'll be respected. It will put you at risk. Your character may be assassinated, your reputation may be questioned and put up to heightened scrutiny. We're talking about when you're living authentically the gospel according to you. You may no longer be invited to some places. You may not be welcomed in the settings where you were once the center of attention. How about that? Your phone may not ring as much, but most of the calls you do receive will be solid, meaningful, and well-intentioned. You will rest better at night, second guess yourself less, become more productive, and perhaps procrastinate a little less. Woo, yes, I need that. You will rely more on your instinct and your intuition than you do the internet. You will focus less on facts and more on truth. You may find yourself more and more engaging only those situations and people that line up with the gospel according to you. Not that you become self-centered or narcissistic, but authentic living frees you up. You seldom make excuses for showing up as you. You may become less defensive, provide fewer explanations about your actions and your decisions, and invest that life energy instead in more creative and efficient ways. You feel more connected to your ancestral energy, receiving guidance and support. You're not shaky, flaky, you're feeling grounded. It's you, authentic you. And last but not least, and I love this one and I'm done, life gets simpler and sweeter when you're living the gospel according to you. The gospel according to you, family, yes, authenticity works, so work it. I thank you, peace and love, family. Many blessings abound, and please stay woke. I turn it back over to Rini or Pastor Miriam. Thank you so much.